Okay, so we'll move a bit quickly through this. Lucid dreaming was first verified by Western science in 1975 at Hull University. The way they did it was, well, they had to prove something. The main argument against lucid dreaming was that how can you be sure they weren't just dreaming they had a lucid dream? Or how can you be sure they weren't having a micro-awakening, a very brief awakening in the night, then dropping back into the same dream, leading to the illusion that they were lucid in their dream? So they knew they had to prove several things. They had to prove they were still asleep. They hadn't had a micro-awakening. And they had to somehow work out how could you send a signal, a conscious signal, from the lucid dream state to the sleep laboratory without waking up. That was what they had to do. Insurmountable task, perhaps, until Keith Hearn did it. He thought, okay, how can I send a signal from the lucid dream state? Maybe I can use fingers. So he put little switches on people's pinkies and said, when you're lucid in the dream and we're hooked up to the brain scanner and everything, move your pinky. And for some people it worked, but because there's muscular paralysis, it's quite difficult to do. He thought, okay, well, what isn't paralyzed in the lucid dream state? The respiratory system, we breathe, and the eyes. So he tried stuff with breathing, but the real breakthrough was with eye movements. Essentially, he said to the lucid dreamer, Alan Wolseley, okay, we're going to hook you up to the EEG equipment. When you're lucid in the dream, I want you to communicate with the outside world using your eyes. What they discovered was when someone's in a lucid dream, if they're like watching a tennis match, you'll see their eyes going tick, 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 because sometimes the eyeballs correspond to the physical activity you're watching or doing in the lucid dream. So he thought, okay, well, it can be like a kind of a Morse code. So once you get lucid, flick your eyes like 2 to the left, 2 to the right, 1 up, something like that, you know, very distinct movements that couldn't be randomized. We'd then check these with an eye movement graph, and we would prove that you were in the dream state, you acknowledged the outside sleep laboratory and went, I'm going to send a signal to the sleep laboratory through my eyes. And they frickin' did it, and here's the proof. These are the eye movements there. This is in the Science Museum in London. These are the kind of the eye thing that he used is there. And for the book that I just gave to that lady, I interviewed Dr. Hearn for this. And he was so sweet. I said, so what was it like when you actually got those signals? And he said, you know in those films, Charlie, those space films, where you've got people from people in the NASA control room and they have a signal from another world? I said, yeah. He went, it was like that, but it was from the inner world. And then he leant back in his chair kind of wistfully and he said, but you know what? In those films, people always give each other high fives, don't they, when that happens? I had no one to high five. I was by myself. And I leant over the table and I went, mate, high five. And he said, 35 years late, but thank you. He's a brilliant guy, brilliant hypnotherapist too, Keith Hearn. He's still working as a hypnotherapist. So we had this proof, so that's important to know. This isn't non-scientific. It has been a scientifically verified phenomena of dreaming sleep since 1975. Then you had LaBerge, a few years later, at Stanford Sleep Laboratory. He did very similar experiments, but he got them peer-reviewed, he got them published in all the big journals. He made a kind of he made a lot of noise about it. So a lot of people think that Stephen LaBerge was the first to get the results, which I think it's important we acknowledge Dr. Keith Hearn was actually the first. But then LaBerge did brilliant work afterwards. Then we have a resurgence in lucid dreaming, just skipping forward a few decades. We have a resurgence in lucid dreaming research around 2009, 2010, which is also around the time films like Inception came out. And that was a really good time to be involved in lucid dreaming. They defined the definition more. So lucid dreaming is a hybrid state of consciousness with definable and measurable differences from the waking state and REM sleep. So now they start to use EEG machines, fMRI scanners, so they can see exactly what's happening to the brain when we get lucid. So 2012, once lucidity is attained, well, you can see what it says. I'll show you with my half a brain. I'm ready for any half the brain jokes you might have. Okay, basically, when you're in non-lucid dreaming, the back part of the brain, so the brain stem, the occipital lobe, lots of activation. Front part of the brain, frontal lobes, especially the prefrontal cortex, very little activation, almost entirely offline when you dream. Now, they believe that your sense of self, your sense of agency, your sense of I am having an experience are somehow located or activated within the prefrontal cortex. So, if that's offline when we dream, that explains how you can dream that you're a man if you're a woman, or you can dream that you're back at school if you're an adult, you can dream you're other people. Last year I had a dream I was the Queen of England. And such a vivid dream. I was her. She's a little bit shorter than me, a little bit wider. I was in a pink pastel dress, and there was a line of people in front of me, and I was doing the thing where I was greeting them. Now, I wasn't lucid. Now, in that dream, I was the queen. I had always been the queen. Charlie didn't exist. The Charlie program wasn't switched on. But the very creative parts of the brain were, so I truly believed I was the queen. Then I woke up in the morning, the alarm went off. Oh, God, what a weird dream. I was dreaming I was the queen. So I reached for my phone, I write in my dream diary. Once I woke up, the prefrontal cortex switched back on. The alarm clock then switched that back on. So now the Charlie program came back online, and I knew it was just a dream. But in most of our dreams, because that bit is switched off, we think our dreams are real. Isn't that a weird thing? We actually think our dreams are real until we wake up and realize it was just a dream. Now, in a lucid dream, the same process occurs, but we stay asleep. So the back part of the brain, brainstem, occipital lobe, very activated, lots of dreaming happening here. Front part of the brain switched off, but because you've done your lucid dreaming training, or you've come to a workshop, or you've just had a spontaneous lucid dream, the front part of the brain switches on, and you see this in the brain scanner. In the fMRI scan, you see specifically the right dorsolateral prefrontal cortex become activated very quickly. And then they wake someone up straight afterwards, and they say, oh my God, I just had a lucid dream, did you get it? So they have a correlation between the subjective experience of lucidity and the activation of certain brain networks. So now we absolutely know it's for real. And the cool thing about that is that it led to a lot of scientific research into lucid dreaming, because they realized that once the prefrontal cortex is activated, a phenomenon known as neuroplasticity becomes engaged. Now, I'm sure we've all heard this before, right? Neuroplasticity, neurons that fire together, wire together. The more we use certain brain networks, the more blood flow they get, the deeper the grooves come into the brain. It's the biological basis of habit, essentially. Now, in a non-lucid dream, because the prefrontal cortex is disengaged, there's very little neuroplasticity occurring. But once the prefrontal cortex becomes activated, as it does with full lucidity, the brain lays down neural pathways in exactly the same way as if you are awake. The brain, in the lucid state, doesn't think you're lucid dreaming, it thinks you're awake, and will start to affect your brain chemistry as if you were doing it really, as if you were awake. So, they discovered that through lucid dreaming, you can actually get better at stuff. You can train in sports and get better at sports in the waking state. Motor skills improvement. So one of the studies they did was on squats. I'm going to tell you some amazing stuff you can do in the lucid dream. You can meet your inner child. You can call out to meet God. You can ask, what is my highest purpose? You can integrate past trauma. You can do your meditation practice. All these amazing things. But these German athletes who are called into this study, out of all the things they could have done, after their weeks and months of training, they're allowed to do one thing once they get lucid: squats. They check how many squats they can do in the daytime, go into the lucid dream, practice doing squats, see how many you can do, check them the next day. Long story short, they got better. They increased their personal best. Same studies using like press-ups and stuff like that. And one of the last studies, oh, here you go. So 1990, the studies began. They were just kind of anecdotal studies. 2011, lucid dreams have a great potential to be used by athletes as a training method. That 2008 one, I was part of that. That was a group of martial artists who could lucid dream. We had to go into the lucid dream state and practice a very specific kick sequence, and then see if we could do it better the next day in the waking state. 80.3% reported waking state increase in martial arts performance. I embarrassingly was part of the 20% who didn't get any better, which is a bit embarrassing. But there's a cool picture of me, so that makes me feel better. Tomorrow's World. Do you remember Tomorrow's World? The older people will, maybe the younger people won't. Tomorrow's World is a brilliant show where they talked about, kind of futurism, really. It was probably about futurism. And they brought back Tomorrow's World, but now it's a kind of a online hub. And for one of their first episodes, they did one about lucid dreaming. So this is the one about lucid dreaming. Lucid dreaming and martial arts training.